Well, you know, when I first heard this, Matt called me, I don't know, just a few weeks ago. And he said, I've got your topic for you, modern maturity. What? So I wasn't quite sure what technology had to do with maturity. But let's see, can we have a slide? That's right, next one. There's the question. Well, this is more about audience than it is about the tools, because all you've heard today is about all the cool things that are out there, and they're great, and I enjoy them, and I like to play with them, and I don't play Angry Birds yet, but I'm working on it. Yes? Oh, yeah, a little louder? Okay, sorry about that. All right, so as far as the topic of modern maturity, when Matt mentioned this, the reason that he brought this up and thought it'd be a good topic is because he does what all good marketers do, and he checks out what some of the comments from people in the audience. And he found out that he heard a lot of the same things over and over again, which was like, I'm too old for this stuff, Twitter makes no sense to me, that kind of thing. Anybody have heard any comments similar to that when you go to technology shows or ever feel that way? Yeah, well, that's why we came up with this topic, and I wanted to address that and maybe make some of the, give you some enthusiasm for the fact that if you are one of the more mature agents, like myself. And so let's look at the group of people who represent really the standard real estate agent. And an average real estate agent right now is about 54 years old. Let me take a poll too. How many people here are under 40? Okay. How many people here have shoes older than some of the presenters you've seen here today? Good. Well, that's why I thought we'd show this. Let's look at what the impact of the boomers are. Now the boomers are the demographic, I think it's 1946 to 1964. It's a span of what? I think that's 18 years. But here's the interesting thing about them. A third of the population is over 50, and that's over 106 million Americans. They control 50% of the country's discretionary income, and they outspent younger adults by $1 trillion. That's trillion with a T. So it's a pretty impressive group of people. Now, if you add people that are from 40 to 50 to that number, it increases to, 60% of the population, or 138 million people. So we can agree from this that there are two things. There are a bunch of them. They have most of the money, and they spend more of it than any other group. But are they online, as William Shatner would say? Next slide. Yes. And they spend more time and money online than any other demographic. Does that surprise anybody? Okay. In addition, they also have the highest level of education. They're more ethnically diverse. They're strongly attracted by socially conscious companies. They consider family and friends to be the most important source of information. Can you say social media? They also, their daily mobile internet access is at similar levels to younger users. And we've already heard today how much, what the future is about as far as the mobile internet is concerned. But unfortunately, they've been ignored by marketers who fail to transition with them. And the reason they've been ignored was brought out by a post in New Media and Marketing that suggested because the advertising industry is dominated by young professionals whose naturally biased views of older adults are often reflected in the marketing messages they create for the boomers. Now, folks, for the first time in history, the majority of the U.S. population is over age 40, and adults over 40 think and act much differently than their younger counterparts. I'm reading from a study here. These differences need to be considered as we craft marketing messages for this huge audience. So wake up and smell the Maylogs. So let's look at what makes the over 40 crowd tick. What can we learn about them? Microsoft, and this is a study I was talking about, asked the same question, and they teamed up with AARP. That's the American Association of Retired Persons, for those of you who don't know. Anybody receive their mail? regularly? You just wait. You turn 50, you get it. Every day. This study was called Boomers and Technology, an Extended Conversation. And according to the study, two perspectives impact the behavior of mature adults. Let's check those out. A generational center court vantage point and the historical perspective of technology. Now, the next slide we'll go into a little more detail on that. Whose kid is that? Okay. Boomers are at the center of their lives. They're impacted by a lot of different things. On any given day, they might have questions from their children. Some might be, Grandma friended me, what do I do now? And also might need to help their grandparents teach them, learn how to play Angry Birds, for example. So during the day, they can experience the enthusiasm of the youthful early adopters and the cautious deliberation of seniors. They're sensitive to the needs and wants of children and maybe their own parents. Let's indulge ourselves for a moment and go to the second part, which is the historical perspective of technology. Anybody recognize any of these things? This is kind of like you may be a redneck if you may be a boomer if you recognize this up here. That's it was a Radio Shack computer. It was called the Trash 80. Anybody have one of those? Good. And the thing over here, the right for all you younger boys and girls, that's called a test pattern. Okay, that's what you got a chance to see because television wasn't on 24/7. You didn't have CNN. It just, about 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, it stopped and you saw this thing and there was a buzzing tone. That was it. Or how many of you remember this thing? Now, what's really funny about this? The dial phone. Didn't you hate friends who had like 9s and 0s in their numbers because all the way around? John, get another number. What's really funny is when you see kids. You get like a kid who's 4 or 5 years old and they see one of these phones. Because I have one in the house. It's like an orange phone that I just keep up for grins. It actually works, or did before VoIP. But the kids will go. They don't get it, no, you do this. So anyway, it's interesting because boomers actually, the older people, we grew up with technology. We grew up with the TRS-80 and some of these other things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're the earliest adapters of these things. It just takes time for us to kind of get used to it. And in this study, which I thought was really interesting, it says that according to the study, it might be helpful to think of the difference between Gen X and Gen Y over the 40s demographic as you would the difference between pioneers and settlers in the Old West. To quote the study, if their children are technology pioneers, the first to explore the new territory, then boomers are the settlers, arriving a bit later to set up schools, libraries, churches, and hospitals, to sink deep roots and build permanent structures. With one foot in the future and the other in the past, they're inventing a world for the 50-year-old of the future. That's where you're all going to be eventually, guys. You do get older, okay? Next slide. Like our friends, Mark and Bill here. Isn't that interesting? Do they look? Never mind. You probably recognize this guy on the left because you found it Facebook, right? And of course, on the right-hand side, we have Bill Gates. Interesting here, Mark is 27 and Bill's 55. So Bill was one of those guys at one time who, worked out of his garage and so forth, and now he's become a boomer, and hopefully Mark, when he gets older, will also hang out with Warren Buffett. But if we're going to craft a strategy that improves the marketing to older people, we need to understand these perspectives and how we would play to that audience. And so this study recommends some things, and these are some of the tactics. The biggest key is emotion. The research has shown that if you make an emotional connection with an older consumer first, they will not only absorb the logistical information later, but they will generally consume more information than their younger counterparts. Emotional connections are even more crucial when marketing to older consumers because older consumers are more likely to follow their gut reaction As we age, we make increasing use of intuition. We put trust in first impressions, which are emotionally generated, and generally we trust our feelings more. What kind of tactics are we talking about here? And there's a great example of how these are actually put into use by, specifically in real estate, by Del Webb. Everybody heard of Del Webb? They're probably the biggest retirement community builder in the country, or if not the world. And some of the tactics that you'll see on their website that are very effective with an older audience include using real images, not stock photography. Because older adults have had so many experiences, they quickly see through false images and staged images, and they'll react negatively. Does that make sense? Also, it says you should use larger images, not just because of an older eyesight, but because the larger the image is, the more likely the brain is to perceive them as real. Adding video was found to increase web page effectiveness by over 10%. The more senses that you can engage, the higher the emotional connection, especially for older website visitors. Now, what does all this mean? What does all this have to do with the older agents complaining about technology and the internet? It proves that the majority of people online are people just like you. Why is that important? Because Edelman, which is probably the most highly rated public relations firm in the world, did a study, and they found that the vast majority of respondents wanted a person like me was considered the most important information about a company. So for older agents, that means you're considered a person like me by the biggest, most affluent, highest spending demographic in the country, both online and offline. So you can just be yourself. I hope what you've heard today will reduce that I'm too old for tech comments and make you feel a little better when you're trying to learn online stuff, because it takes a while to do this, right? Yeah, it is good vodka. Thank you. Thanks for the Stoli. But I want to end with one more advantage that I think that you have as a boomer, as an older person with a few gray hairs. And let me tell you how that story came about, okay? You see, there was this old wealthy woman who was an avid photographer and traveler. And she decided to go on the most exciting trip of her life. She wanted to do a safari in Africa. So she took her old poodle with her. The poodle was quite old as well. And so they set up the camp at the safari, for the safari. And the poodle started running around playing, chasing butterflies, and having a really good time. And then suddenly discovered two things. One, she was lost. And two, there was this young leopard heading in her direction, looking really hungry. Ruh-roh. So she goes, well, what do I do now? And she saw some bones next to her. And she said, so she turned her back to the big cat. And she started messing around in the bones. And just when the cat got almost to her and she knew it was about to leap, she goes, wow, that was really a delicious leopard. I hope there are more of those around here. Well, the leopard overheard this and, went over and started slinking back into the woods. And went, wow, man, that old poodle almost had me. So this was being observed by a monkey, and as monkeys will do. The monkey went chasing after the leopard, and the poodle saw it go after the leopard, and found the leopard, caught up with it, and said, well, he told him the story. He says, you've been had. Well, this made the young leopard furious. He says, well, you get on my back. I'm going to go back and I'm going to seek my vengeance on that poodle. So they went tearing through the woods back to where the poodle was, and the poodle went, okay, what am I going to do now? So she goes back and she sits by the bones and she's looking around like this, and she goes, just when the leopard gets close to striking again, says, where's that damn monkey? I sent him after another leopard. So that, folks, is your pithy maxim from the fable, and just one more advantage to remember.